think I mentioned this in a few of my videos so far, but I have a webcomic. It's a goofy little project that I started officially posting about a year and a half ago. Ever since I posted my first chapter way back in June 2023, I've been posting a chapter every single week. And it's a project that I'm really proud of and one that I've found a pretty good weekly rhythm. While the memory of being an absolute beginner webcomic artist is still in my brain, that I would share the process of making it in this video. We'll go through a step-by-step process of making webcomics in general. Consider it advice from an ex-beginner. So, before you even draw a single panel of your webcomic, you should do something that I call pre-production, or if that sounds very intimidating to you, you can just call it planning. I have a little checklist that I went through when I was making my webcomic, and so we'll go through all of those right now for pre-production. These are also generally in the order I'd suggest you do them in, but if you bounce around between all of these tasks, I think that also works fine. First up is what I'm calling general conceptualization. In this phase, it's mainly important just to experiment and to explore different possibilities. A good way to start is if you already have a vague story idea, if you have some uncertainties about what certain characters are going to do or where the story is going to go, you could sort of list some various options, but nothing is set in stone quite yet. Just writing down all of the different ideas. But you collect this whole list of ideas that then you can pick and choose for steps that are later on the list. Another thing to consider for pre-production is scope. One question you might ask is, what platforms are you thinking of posting this on? A good way of putting this is that most social media sites either account for swiping or for scrolling. The other couple of questions that I think is good for scope is both asking yourself how frequently you want to post and also how much you want to post. Do not feel pressured to post every single week if you don't think you can feasibly do that. A lot of creators just post once a month and they do just fine. Also, in terms of how much you're going to post, is it going to be just a page? Is it going to be a couple pages worth? It doesn't have to be a whole lot. I think it just depends on your preference and also just understanding your own limits. I think if you want to figure out if posting a week or every other week is possible, I'd suggest trying to draw like what you would consider a single chapter's worth of content and time how long it takes for you to do that from sketch to completed render. From there, you'll get a sense of your pace and you'll understand maybe if you need to cut back on how much you make per week or if you want to give yourself more time. That's how you would figure out something like that if you don't know. Next part is story. Figuring out the story layout. I'll admit, story is not the portion of the webcomic process that I can give you fully 100% certain advice about. I've been writing stories for not as long as I've been drawing art. Connect all of the dots and make the story cohesive was this idea of building from a singular central theme, and pretty much the setting exists to enhance the themes, the story's arcs exist to react or have different opinions connected to the theme, etc., etc. This helps keeps the story cohesive, it keeps characters connected with their parallels, and it makes it so that all of the interactions and lore implications have a meaning, blah blah blah. I think from there, then you can start going back to your list that you made in your conceptualization phase and start picking out story ideas in which some of them are hot garbage and which ideas that you might be kind of cooking with. But don't feel like you have to be married to anything, of course. A lot of the times when it comes to development in stories, you do have to be willing to kill your darlings, which means if a certain part of the story isn't working, it might have to change or go away. But yeah, from there you can begin actually organizing parts of your story. One thing that I use to keep all of the story elements together is the Notes app. I don't use it on my phone, I use it on my laptop because I have a Mac, and the reason why I use it over something more I guess, official looking like Google Docs is just with the Notes app. It's one, more casual seeming, which I think helps me be less intimidated when I go and jot down some notes. And two, it's really easy to get organized and to quickly flip back and forth between different pages and folders. There's probably other alternatives out there that do the same thing, but this is what I use. You definitely should know how you're going to start the story and how it's going to end. I'd recommend that one thing that you should at least do story-wise is to have a full plot outline in which you list out every single scene, what is happening in the scene, and how those scenes are having a forward momentum that naturally lead into the next one, and so on and so forth. A method that I saw that you use with sticky notes, actually. If you have a blank wall, you can use that, but I stuck a bunch of them on multiple large pieces of paper, and it looks something like this. Basically what you're looking at here is that every column of sticky notes represents one scene, and then the sticky notes I've color-coded by pen ink color, and for each scene, the different colors represent a different character, and so I have my two main characters, Ash and Baleb, and I write pretty much what one character is doing on their sticky note, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're thinking about, and then in the other one, I write what the other character is doing, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're thinking about. I found that this technique helped me a lot. When I'm thinking of concepts for a story, I tend to have all of these ideas for the emotional highs, grand set pieces, all of the crazy parts of the story that you anticipate that your readers are going to really grip them the most. The problem is, though, is pacing yourself and doing development and plot progression and character arcs progressing, so that way getting to those high points feels genuinely earned. And so when I was using this technique, I would start with the scenes that I already had in mind like this, and I would place them on the board or on the paper about where I thought they would be, and then I would start filling in the gaps. I'd start thinking about what does character A need to do to get to this point emotionally to be able to do this thing in this big scene. Then I think about that, and I think about, like, what's a scenario I can put the characters through that would get them to develop that way, and it helps you start filling in the blanks and realizing what's necessary, and you just come up with a bunch of different types of scenes really quickly. Another added benefit to this being sticky notes is that if you're going through this process and realize that certain scenes could actually go a little bit earlier or could go a little bit later, it's very easy just to take the sticky note off and move them around very easily and allow you to experiment in a very loose kind of way. And from there, what I ended up doing partway through the comic actually being made is that I translated all those sticky notes into an outline in my notes app, and I elaborated a lot more on each individual scene. Next up is one that also doesn't have to take super long, which is just figuring out style/art direction. This one you can figure out either by drawing a bunch of stuff, making some Pinterest boards, both. Pretty much the point of this phase is figuring out what you want the style for the comic to be, figuring out certain visual aspects like what do you want the boxes to look like, what do you want the bubbles to look like, what sort of font are you going to use for the text. But it's also some of the more fun stuff too, like what's going to visually inspire things like the setting or the clothing, that sort of stuff. You can also pull from a lot of your concepts that you made earlier to do this phase. Then we get to the part that I think is most people's favorite when it comes to pre-production, which is taking all of this concepts, all of your story considerations, picking out some art direction stuff, and actually getting to design your environments, your characters, your props, and anything else that is especially relevant. Again, I wouldn't say that you have to design absolutely everything, but things like your main characters, important side characters, important locations, you should figure out what a lot of that's going to look like. I'd suggest for locations and settings to also make some maps or some room layouts if it's an interior, just so that you can use it for reference, so you can figure out what furniture goes where. Some people go into programs like The Sims and build stuff so that way they can reference certain settings from different angles. It's just so you can keep your scenes consistent. I won't spend too much talking about character design or setting design in particular, since those could be topics for their own videos. But I will say, generally, when picking out what concepts you want to go with, I'd prioritize 2 things. 1, what serves the story best, and 2, what seems really exciting and fun to draw, because webcomics can be kind of a commitment, and so you can allow yourself some self-indulgence to keep you going. I think after this, then you do a final check through of everything that you've made for pre-production, just doing a final little check off to make sure that these are the directions you want to go in, though if you are going to pivot pretty significantly, you are going to have to do some of this process over again. But certain minor changes in things like character design I don't think are that big of a deal. I think 13 chapters into my webcomic, I decided that the lab should have some leg warmers to make her legs have more of this angular silhouette, and so I just threw those on her with no like in-lore explanation. No biggie. Congratulations! You can now actually start making the thing. Everyone, applause. So now, you get to production, or comic making. Let me just tell you how I make my thing each week. Typically, I start by writing a script first. I write my scripts sort of like screenplays, in the sense that I always prioritize dialogue, since that's the type of text that is going to actually still be physically read by readers. Usually with my scripts, I don't go super hard in the prose. Sometimes I give myself notes in my scripts of how characters are supposed to be emoting, or in what way they're trying to deliver their dialogue, what's being implied, what's going on in characters' heads directly, that sort of thing. For scripts, I'd suggest making individual scripts per scene, and I'd suggest writing at least the first handful of scenes ahead of time, so that way you have time to look back and revise your scripts ahead of time. I say this because recently I've not been the best at doing this. I frequently write a whole scene the week it is needed. So don't be like me, kids. I say it's good to write the first handful of scenes, so that way you can kind of get the sense of how the first scenes in this batch can help set up and lead naturally into future ones. After I get done with the scripts, I then have to translate the text from the script into visuals, which the first step of turning things into visuals is thumbnailing. There's this really great video made by John Brinkley, I believe, that explains a way to do the thumbnailing process in a way that's really easy. The whole topic of thumbnailing and composition and panel layout is a whole other beast that, again, it could be a whole other video. But here's some tips to consider when you're thumbnailing. First thing is you almost want to think like an animator or storyboard artist with these layouts. You're trying to think about how you can tell a story through visuals. Certain things that you can do is you can fiddle with the perspective, or where the camera, quote unquote, is. Basically, are we zoomed really out? Are we really close up? Is the camera kind of at a lower angle looking up at something, or is it kind of looking down at something? What in each panel are we even looking at? Are we looking at a character? Are we looking at like their face? Are we looking at a pose or some sort of body language that they're doing? Are we focusing on a background, like an establishing shot? Are we focused on a particular item? You can also think about pacing within the thumbnails. I think generally for my scripts, every sentence or two in my script usually translates to one panel. Other things with pacing is that if there's supposed to be some sort of pause, a panel should be probably placed to indicate that. Generally, the larger the panel, it's something that you as the artist really want the audience to look at. Smaller panels in quick succession implies like stuff is happening in not a huge amount of time. I like using small thin panels, or just small panels in general, to just capture like little like subtle movements or reactions that characters have There's also just the matter of actual layout of panels, i.e. like how large or small they are, where the bubbles are going to go in relation to the panels, how many of them are there at a time. This is the part of the composition process where understanding whether you're going to do a scroll format or a swiping format is really important. When it comes to the process of actually thumbnailing, you're probably going to want to prioritize your text boxes or your bubbles first. And then secondly, for every panel, you're going to prioritize whatever the main subject of that panel is going to be. And so if you want a character's expression to be important, then that should take second priority. If you want it to be a particular object they're supposed to be looking at, then it can be that. With stuff like that, then you also get into just more general compositional rules like rule of thirds or golden ratio, that sort of thing. It's a process that requires a lot of thought, but once I get done with this process, for me personally, I rejoice because it means that I get to the part where I don't have to think as much, which is the actual drawing of the thing. For me, making every chapter from week to week always starts with sketching. I sketch physically, and I take photos of every individual panel and throw them onto my canvas. And I arrange and tweak the sizes of them a bit in order for all of the space between each panel to be consistent for the most part. Immediately for this part, you're probably going to want to think about canvas size. I think if you're doing a swiping format, you probably can do the size of a normal comic page, maybe a little bit squattier. For Webtoon and Tapas, they're always going to compress your canvas sizes to a certain length. The size chunks they put in is about this size, but I find that I usually double the width of the canvas just so I can pack in more detail, and I usually triple, or I guess times 6 the length that's usually required. Mainly so that way, for the scrolling format, I can think about just conditions where I can take advantage of the user having to scroll. From there, after I've pasted all of the sketches onto my canvas, then I do all of the text bubbles if I have them. I make my own font. I used Calligrapher, which allows you to make your own font. You just download a little sheet and you type in the letters as you go, and then you re-upload that sheet. It's pretty simple. You can use it for free, but you can only upload one font at a time. I did that personally because I felt like with my particular style, a lot of normal fonts would just not look quite right with it, especially since I'm hand drawing all of my boxes and bubbles a particular way as well. But I think for a lot of art styles, there might be other fonts out there that are pleasing. There's also websites where you can download fonts for free. So I type those out. I have some particular settings for like spacing between letters and in between lines, and then I adjust the text boxes to make something that I think when there's a bubble drawn around it will make an oval shape that's not too circular but also not too stretched out. So I do all those, and then I draw the bubbles. In terms of how much space you should leave in between the text and the bubbles, I heard a tip from a professor once that you should have like a capital letter length of whatever your font is that wraps around the bubble. That's about the spacing you should have. From there, then I just draw in all of the panels, and then I usually do character line art first, and then character colors. And for at least my recent batch of chapters, I've been switching from doing just one layer for all of the backgrounds instead of 2. But once you do feel happy with the chapter that you've made, or you've just come up to your deadline, then you get to the uploading process. Real quick, for formats like Webtoon and Tapas, you'll have to make a couple other assets, I guess, aside from the comic itself. You'll need to do a title page and a banner for your comic's homepage. Both of these sites have specific ratios that, unlike with the comic itself, you cannot upload something larger and it'll compress down. It has to be this particular size. So that's something to consider. Generally, with the banners and the covers, I guess, it's important to put the title of your comic and to put like your main characters on there and just showcasing some of your art. That's a big banger. And you also will have to type up a bio for your story. Try to just sum it up in like 2-3 sentences. Try to appeal to the type of audience that you think will really enjoy this. And if you want, list on what day you upload as well. When it comes to uploading, Webtoon will compress your drawings for you. Tapas won't. My suggestion is that you use this site called Crappie, which I'll link down in the description, which you upload and it slices and compresses stuff for Tapas for you. Also, for each chapter, you'll need to come up with a title for it. Some people group their chapters as a part of larger arcs or sections, and this is like chapter 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, etc. I give each chapter a name, but up to your preference, I think. I think the other section of uploading that requires some thought is figuring out your genre. To me, genre is not something that you have to adhere to conventionally all the time. Genres are not strict rules to stick to, they're more of a tool for marketing. Thinking about like what's the type of audience for a particular genre that you're looking at the list, and thinking about, is that audience one that probably would like your thing? And so if so, pick that. Here's a little graphic that summarizes about what my weekly rhythm is, how I divide up all of the work. You can adjust this if you want. The goal of this video was to give some, I guess, more practical advice about the topic, advice that would have helped me years ago. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you want, and sleep well.